So it's been a little while since the last release history episode, and I thought we'd take a look at Sylvanus this time. He's definitely a pretty broken release in his own way, and combined with his tree, Sylvanus has had a huge impact on the duo lane at his release. We'll talk about his release date, abilities and stats, as well as the nerfs and buffs he's received as he's carved his path through the branches of Smite history to get where he is today. So let's jump straight in. So Sylvanus' passive now is decent but not great. However, at release, this would affect all basic attacks, including ranged basic attacks, whereas now it only affects melee gods. This was a pretty big deal in the duo lane, as the enemy hunter would have trouble poking Sylvanus because they got rooted all the time, which either allowed Sylvanus to escape and not take any extra basic attacks, or to actually engage on the enemy ADC once they got rooted off of this passive. And one other thing to note, since it's technically part of his passive, Sylvanus' AoE basic attacks used to have a standard ranged basic attack range, aka 55 units, which was pretty crazy at release, because you could stand quite far back and still hit the wave or poke enemies. Also, his basic attacks would have a knockback effect on minions which would interrupt their attacks, causing the enemy wave to do significantly less damage because they were always being knocked around and interrupted by Sylvanus' basic attacks. So moving on, the one was pretty interesting at release. In most areas it was actually weaker than present day and it was buffed a bit during the course of Sylvanus' existence, but the root duration was 2 seconds at launch regardless of ability rank instead of 1.25 seconds today. That alone made this ability really strong, since no one wants to beads a root, but sometimes you had to because otherwise you'd take 2 or 3 free auto attacks from the enemy ADC as soon as he hit you with this, plus any extra damage from Sylvanus himself or minions, and that really adds up. It also had a 12-second base cooldown at all ranks, where it now scales down from 16 to 12 seconds, so that helped too. He could spam this ability quite a lot. Being able to root for 2 seconds on a 12-second cooldown was really strong, even if some of the other aspects of this ability, like the MP5 or the damage, were a bit weaker. But all that I've mentioned before now is nothing compared to the real reason release Sylvanus was so busted, that being his second ability, Wisps. I'll just come out with it right now. Wisps could hit minions when Sylvanus was first released, so not only did he have AoE auto attacks that could clear insanely fast and knock back enemy minions interrupting their casts, he also had an AoE damage ability that hit all 6 enemy minions while simultaneously healing his own 6 minions. This ability was truly what broke release Sylvanus. He was the go-to high-pressure support for duo lane because he was probably the fastest clearing of any support while also healing his own wave with the same ability, meaning you could push waves insanely fast and the ADC could focus on poking or last-hitting minions instead of actually having to use mana to clear the wave because Sylvanus could handle that for them. This ability also scaled down to 14 seconds at rank 5, and you were definitely ranking this ability first at launch, and also healed for a lot more than it does now. So I'll just quickly cover his 3 and ultimate because outside of his passive 1 and 2, not that much has changed in his kit since its release. His 3 was mostly the same but had a ridiculously long cooldown at 30 seconds, almost rivaling old Arachne ultimate where the design for this ability came from. And the ultimate was literally exactly the same. As far as I know, this ability has received 0 changes since launch, same damage, same AoE, same cooldown. Alright, so with his release abilities covered, let's move into the nerfs and also some buffs Sylvanus has received from his release to get him to where he is in the modern day. So a bug fix patch was the first to hit Sylvanus, and the only real change here was of course reducing his basic attack range down to 40. There are some other bug fixes, but that was the only impactful balance change made in this patch. 2 weeks later, however, on October 15th, 2014, Sylvanus got hit with a few pretty significant nerfs. The root duration on his 1 was taken down to the 1.25 seconds it is today from 2 seconds at launch, and Wisps took a couple of nerfs, both in the healing per tick, as well as changing the cooldown from 18 scaling down to 14 to just 18 seconds flat. Definitely a worthy change for his most broken ability, but there was still the issue of it hitting minions at this point, so it was still pretty broken. A few months later, however, on February 11th, 2015, Sylvanus' Wisps were finally changed to only affect gods. It took them a little while, but this ability was the crux of what made Sylvanus so oppressive in lane at launch, and changing it was absolutely necessary if they ever wanted him to be balanceable. With Wisps as they were at launch, he was always going to be the best lane dominator in the entire game simply because of his insane wave clear and poke, while also healing his own wave with a single ability. So things were fairly quiet for Sylvanus after this change, as he settled into his place a little more now, as his ridiculous Wisps have been changed and people knew how to actually play him as a support and not just a wave clear machine. However, there was still one remnant of his release lane domination left, that being his knockback effect on minions that would interrupt their attacks. That was changed on May 12th, 2015, followed by a change to his passive on August 4th of the same year, which changed it into the form we now know today, which only triggers from melee basic attacks and not ranged ones. There was another gap after these nerfs in terms of changes for Sylvanus, and it appears appeared he settled into being a fairly low tier god after most of his lane dominance was taken from him. February 2nd, 2016, in the release patch of Season 3 was the next time we took a look at the Tree Man himself. This was a slight cooldown reduction to Nature's Grasp, which was definitely called for given how long that cooldown was at launch. This was quickly followed up by another patch doing basically the same thing on April 12, 2016, reducing the cooldown even further and also changing the mana cost to reduce it as you ranked it up instead of increasing. This ability was fairly weak, however, and wasn't quite at the current cooldown yet. A short break and we're back at it again on July 6th with some minor changes to the plant behaviour of his 1 to bring it more in line with what it is today, followed up quickly by some pretty significant buffs on August 30th, 2016, which touched up his 1, 2 and 3. The 1 got 80 more damage at the top end, while Wisps got 5 extra protections at all ranks, and Nature's Grasp got a cooldown reduction for the 3rd time already, down to 20, scaling down to 16 seconds. However, even after 3 buffs to its cooldown, it's still not as low as modern day Sylvanus 3. So a classic high-res buff nerf patch came at the start of Season 4 on February 1st, 2017. The start of this season came with a lot of changes to healers, and Sylvanus took some collateral damage, taking off some of the base and scaling of the heal, but to compensate, he also got the protection reduction you get from destroying the plants added to the actual initial hit of the ability itself, which definitely helps, especially early game as you follow up on that route. However, this change proved a little too much early game pressure in the duo lane, and it was nerfed pretty quickly in patch 4.4 on March 14th, 2017, where the cooldown was nerfed from 12 seconds at all ranks to 16 seconds, scaling down to 12, hurting his early game a little bit. So our tree friend actually didn't see any major changes after this, pretty much for 2 years. But Season 6 came in with a small buff to his Wisps, making them more consistent and having them deal an extra tick of damage as soon as they hit the target. Season 6 was good to Sylvanus overall, giving him some pretty big cooldown reductions in patch 6.10, taking Wisps down by 2 seconds at all ranks. And finally, light the beacons! After 4 separate cooldown reductions, Nature's Grasp has finally reached its modern day cooldown of 18, scaling down to 14 seconds. Rejoice, Sylvanus mains. Maybe we'll see a 5th change to this cooldown of the ability at some point, you never know. And one last tiny change a couple months later on November 12th, 2019 allowed his 1 to go over walls. But that's it for Sylvanus' release history. From an absolute lane dominator to just pretty good at lane dominating, Sylvanus has had some pretty significant changes over the years, mostly to his basic abilities and passive that have moulded him into the god he is today, from a pretty broken release that would destroy any duo lane comp in existence. But that's about it from me. I'll catch you guys in another video later on. Have a great day, stay safe, and peace out, you nerds.